Well, we've been looking at characters and snapshot stories from the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, this whole fall. And we've looked at some of the ancient ancestors of the faith. And now we are looking at some interesting stories from some of the prophets. And this story, in some ways, the main character is one of the prophets named Elisha. But in other ways, the main characters are different than what you would think. So it's a fascinating story. If you'd like to read along, you can find it on page 336 in the front portion of your red pew Bible. I'll be reading from 2 Kings chapter 5, verses 1 through 15. Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Aram, was a great man and in high favor with his master, because by him the Lord had given victory to Aram. The man, though a mighty warrior, suffered from leprosy. Now the Arameans, on one of their raids, had taken a young girl captive from the land of Israel, and she served Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, "If only my lord were with the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy." So Naaman went in and told his lord just what the girl from the land of Israel had said. And the king of Aram said, "Go then, and I will send along a letter to the king of Israel." He went, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 sets of garments. He brought the letter to the king of Israel, which read, "When this letter reaches you, know that I have sent to you my servant Naaman, that you may cure him of his leprosy." Now, when the king of Israel read this letter, he tore his clothes and said, "Am I God to give death or life, that this man sends word to me to cure a man of his leprosy? Just look and see how he's trying to pick a quarrel with me." But when Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, he sent a message to the king, "Why have you torn your clothes? Let him come to me, that he may learn that there is a prophet in Israel." So Naaman came with his horses and chariots and halted at the entrance of Elisha's house. Elisha sent a messenger to him, saying, "Go, wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh shall be restored, and you shall be clean." But Naaman became angry and went away, saying, "I thought that for me he would surely come out and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, and would wave his hand over the spot and cure the leprosy. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better waters than all of the waters in Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean?" He turned and went away in a rage. But his servants approached and said to him, "Father, if the prophet had commanded you to do something difficult, would you not have done it? How much more when all he said to you was, 'Wash and be clean'?" So he went down and immersed himself 7 times in the Jordan, according to the word of the man of God. His flesh was restored like the flesh of a young boy, and he was clean. Then he returned to the man of God, he and all of his company. He came and stood before him and said, "Now I know that there is no God in all of the earth except in Israel. Please accept a present from your servant." God, give us ears to hear, eyes to see, and hearts that are open to receive and respond to your message, your word to us this day. Amen. All right, well, this story is really fascinating, complex, and multifaceted. From the very beginning, we learn a few things about one of the main characters, Naaman. First, and this is very important to know, he was a foreigner, particularly a powerful foreigner, commanding the army of Israel's enemy, Aram. So he's not just a foreigner, he's really an outsider and an enemy. And that is actually really important to know in the very outset of this story. It's also important to know that Naaman has leprosy. Now, in Middle Eastern society, especially in Jewish society, this carried with it a stigma of social and cultural alienation. Leprosy was really bad. it was very visible on the outside. You knew when someone had leprosy. It was a skin disease. And with it, there was actually religious and cultural restrictions about how close you could get to people who suffered from leprosy. So you were really meant to be an outsider, because the thought was if you came in contact with them, it would spread. So you have to stay outside, no matter who you are. Now, this leprosy is clearly something that Naaman wanted to be rid of. He did not want to suffer with this for life. So he talks to his king, the king of Aram, and he is willing to endanger what was going on then was a pretty fragile truce between these two nations of Aram and Israel. And he was willing to sort of endanger that by sending a letter and sending Naaman to Israel, to the king of Israel, to be healed. Now, Naaman takes lots of wealth with him. We read about all the money and the entourage that he comes with. It's really a procession of power. And he rolls up eventually, after the letter goes to the king, he's sent to the house of Elijah. He's a prophet. The Bible says he's a man of God. And it's interesting because Naaman shows up ready to buy a cure. He comes with all this gold and garments and his horses and chariots. He wants this prophet to know, I am an important person, a man of power and prestige. And he had this certain sense of entitlement. After Elisha didn't even come to the door but sent a messenger to say, go wash in the Jordan, we read that Naaman gets kind of mad. He's like, for me, I thought surely he would come out and I love that, just wave his hand around the spot and cure me. I'm not sure if you know any people who also suffer from a sense of entitlement, but they sort of think, well, I can get what I want. I'm entitled to get what I want. If I have power, if I have wealth, I can buy what I need. And that's kind of how he approached this situation, how he approached Elisha. But, though that might have been the way of the world, and might still be, the ways of the God of Israel run counter to this. It's not those who have power and prestige, but it's those who are lowly, those who are humbled, are lifted up. And this was an important life lesson for this man, this foreigner, to learn. And so this is a story about the humble and the unlikely channels of God's healing. Because, if you recall, Naaman learns, first of all, how he might be healed. We don't know how long he suffered. We don't know what else he tried to get rid of his leprosy. He clearly had reputation, he had fame, he had resources, wealth, he had everything he needed, but he clearly couldn't get rid of the leprosy. He heard of it from a young Israelite girl, a powerless slave, a servant in his home, who he took captive in one of their wars. Think about that. This girl had very little power, but she had a voice. And she was willing to speak up and to use her voice. But also think about this. Who is she using her voice to help? Her captive. You know, the person who took her from her home, took her from everything that she knew, maybe treated her well, we hope, but she's living in a foreign land. This is technically her enemy, and yet she has compassion and courage, realizes that he is suffering, and the suffering could be alleviated. He could be healed. So a very unlikely source for Naaman to hear about this potential place of healing. And Naaman does have the compassion and the grace and the wisdom, I would say, going back to last week talking about wisdom, to value the word of this servant girl who was passed to him. This word was passed along to him through his wife. So that's the first unlikely source. And then he travels all the way to Israel and meets a prophet. And this prophet doesn't provide any special rite of healing, But the prophet also doesn't treat him like an outsider or like an enemy. Naaman could have been turned away. And even the cultural norms would have said, he has leprosy. You turn him away. And he wasn't one of them. But Elisha does offer help, but from a very unlikely source. He tells him to go to the Jordan River and to wash 7 times. Now, if you've been to the Jordan River, I actually have a bottle of water from the Jordan River that I use for baptisms. Let's say it's not the clearest, okay? Not the clearest. It's fine to baptize. Usually you don't come out with skin diseases. Although, back then, Naaman probably thought, I'm going to come out worse if I go into the Jordan River. They had very clean rivers where they were. And he said, well, shouldn't I just go, if it's just about washing, shouldn't I just go to a cleaner river and wash? It wasn't just about that. It was about humility and faith as well. So Elijah gives instruction to go to the Jordan and wash 7 times. Now, that might sound kind of strange, and it did sound strange to Naaman. He was a little bit upset at first. But I was thinking about this. We have these sort of, not just phrases, but these practices that have been handed down from generations at times that might not make sense, but we keep telling people to do these things, and it will alleviate certain problems, certain ailments. So, like chicken soup fights the cold, right? How does it do it? I don't know, but apparently, chicken soup fights the cold. Honey relieves a scratchy throat or a cough, right? Even doctors will say, less medicine, more honey, right? Gargle salt water for a sore throat. How many of you have ever done that? All right, almost all of you. Hopefully it helped, right? But you think, this is interesting, right? If someone told you that and you'd never tried it before, you're like, okay, I'll try it, but it is interesting. Prop your head with a pillow to drain your sinuses. You ever done that? Maybe less. All right, this one is probably coming from the Italian tradition. Soothe a burn with olive oil. I mean, they just love olive oil. And I see a couple of hands, yeah, okay, all right. So the Italians they use olive oil for everything. I mean, every single thing, right? Like, it's a great salad dressing. It also helps with burns. This one is interesting. I've not heard of this nor tried it, but onions cure earaches. Now, I'm not sure if you're supposed to eat the onions or put the onions in your ear, but somehow onions cure earaches. And then this one, cure a toothache with brandy. That does work. By the way, brandy works for a lot of aches as well. Just saying. So I found some of these other ones too that were just really, really interesting. So a woman said, my grandma, who was a nurse, told me that if you got the hiccups, plug your ears and your nose and drink 3 big gulps of water. Right? This is starting to sound like the advice that Elisha gave Naaman. All right, how about this one? When we had a cold, she would have us sit down on a chair with a bucket of very hot water at our feet. She would spread vapor rub, Vicks vapor rub, on the soles of our feet and have us dip them in the water. Interesting, right? How about wet a dish towel? Put your face into the cloth and breathe deeply for 5 to 10 minutes. This will clear your sinuses. Right? There's all sorts of remedies. I'm sure you have your own that you have tried and that you will eventually pass on to others. And it was kind of like that situation. Naaman hears this and thinks, really? But after the counsel of his servants, remember, he walked away angry. He was going to leave. It was his servants that said, hold on for a second. It's not that hard to do. You would have done something a lot harder. You would have given all of the gold. You would have given everything. All he's asking you to do is to go down to the river and wash. Why not just try it and see what this God of Israel may or may not be able to do? So Naaman has the wisdom of being able to hear advice from the outside of his bubble of privilege. He swallows his pride, treks down the long, steep road down to the Jordan Valley, washes 7 times, and voila, it is a miracle. Healing in this story comes from as an unlikely source as Vicks vapor, onions, hot dish towels, or olive oil. He is healed. And then he returns. See, he's a changed person. He left Elijah angry, right? He returns humble. He returns grateful. He returns with thanks. And he says, now I know that there is no God in all the earth except in Israel, because God did for him what he could not do for himself. Let me say that again. God did for him what he could not do for himself. This powerful soldier, stricken with a difficult disease, reluctantly follows the advice and the counsel of others, servants and outsiders, follows the prophet's instructions, and finds his health and his faith renewed and restored. But this healing didn't happen in isolation. Though Elisha becomes the conduit of God's healing, I would still say that the essential character in the story from the very beginning was the Israelite slave girl. She's not even named in the story. And as quickly as she enters the story, she fades into the background. Though nameless, her role is pivotal. It was her compassion, her courage, and her voice speaking up that was the catalyst, the beginning of Naaman's healing. She was the one who directed Naaman to the healing power of the God of Israel. She was the initiator of hope. Because prior to that, maybe he had lost all hope that he would ever be rid of this disease. But then this young girl speaks up and just with a few words initiates hope. And friends, we live in a world where we need hope, where we can be voices of hope for people who have maybe been suffering for a long time in different forms. People that might think there's no second chance for me. This is life the way it's going to be. They're hopeless and dying on the inside for a lack of hope. And we can be channels and conduits of hope. This story reveals that healing often arrives through relationships and in community. As we say, it takes a village, and it really does take a village. Sometimes we have to look past outward appearances and cultural differences. Empathy and compassion must direct our attitudes and our actions, rather than criticism or judgment or fear or alienation. Yes, in this story, faith was clearly involved in healing, but so too was openness to hear what others were saying. And I think in Naaman's situation, the humility to admit that healing really was needed. I think back to a song of a band, REM. I don't know if any REM fans here, but this goes back to the late 80s and early 90s. But they have a song called Everybody Hurts. There's actually a lot of truth to that, friends. Everybody hurts sometimes. And until we acknowledge that and recognize that about ourselves, about our loved ones, it's very hard to be on the path of healing until we can at least acknowledge that we are hurting. And that is the reality. I've experienced it. I know it. I'm sure you have as well. That everybody suffers at some point in life. Maybe you're not right now. Maybe you are going to be the voice of hope, a conduit to God's healing. But maybe you are someone who is suffering right now. There are those among us and in our families and in our community who need healing. Physical healing, our prayer team prays for that. We get these requests 5 to 10 to 15 every week of people who are suffering physically. We're praying and hoping and pleading. There are people who need emotional healing, mental, psychological healing. There are people that need relational healing. Relationships have been severed and are breaking apart. And maybe you think that they're broke, that they can't be repaired. But there's a healing that needs to happen. There are those who are suffering because they have been made to feel like an outsider or marginalized for what they look like or what they don't look like, how they dress, how they behave, what they don't own, where they live, how they have behaved or acted in the past. People who have made to be felt like an outsider for not following certain social norms. All sorts of reasons can be causes for people to feel like an outsider, to feel like they are not welcome, they are not wanted. And even if they look good on the outside, or they mask it with power and prestige, we all know that we can still be suffering on the inside and just as much in need of a healing touch or a healing word or a healing embrace from somebody. And the good news, friends, is that healing can come. We are people that believe in the power of healing, people of faith. That healing can come, and healing can come from unlikely people and in unusual ways if we are open to it. And sometimes that's the key. We have to be open to healing coming from maybe places or people that you wouldn't have expected. And we can be a source of healing for others through our presence, through our words, through our counsel, and through our care. We need God's Spirit to help us accept one another, as we sung earlier, because we all have lots of differences. And if we let differences divide us, well, then there is very little hope. But if we see past the differences, or even embrace the differences and say that we are one family, we are one community, we're living in a world that needs to be brought back together. And if we love and accept one another, and we are voices of hope and healing for one another, that has the ability to change and to transform society. Our world needs us, the church, to be not just a physical place, but a community of acceptance, of forgiveness, of grace, and healing. If we can't offer that, we have very little to offer. But we can offer that, and this world is in need of that. We need more acceptance. We need more forgiveness. We need more grace. We need more healing. And certainly, we all need more hope. But that is the good news, that hope is here. Hope is here, and hope is present for all of us, and we can be channels of hope. Howard Thurman, 20th century African-American church leader, wrote this wonderful short poem called "For One Who Suffers." I know I cannot enter all you feel, nor bear with you the burden of your pain. I can but offer what my love does give, the strength of caring, the warmth of one who seeks to understand. This I do in quiet ways, that on your lonely path you may not walk alone. Friends, may that be true of us. May we know that we are never walking alone, for God is walking with us, besides us, ahead of us. And may we love and accept one another so that we walk with one another on the road. Amen.